Gerry is probably best known to most of you as the former owner of Mount Albert Scale Lumber Company. And many of you have probably also heard his presentation on layout light basics and his clinic with Mike May on lighting controls last fall. Gerry lives in Southern Ontario, about 30 minutes from Niagara Falls. He started a new layout in ON30 about 9 years ago, and tonight he is going to give us a review of the progress to date. Gerry, over to you.
Thanks, Pete, for the introduction, and thanks also for the opportunity to do a progress report on my Mariposa Short Line Railway. Welcome to everyone. This is definitely a work in progress, and if there is any bright side to the COVID thing, there's been more work done on this railroad in the last 2 years than in the previous 9. So I guess we try to look on the bright side. So where this began was when I had a very good English teacher in high school. And one of the books we had to read was Sunshine Sketches of a Little Town by Stephen Leacock, who most of you probably haven't heard of, but he's a Canadian a novelist. And this is a satirical novel. It's a tongue-in-cheek, somewhat fun poke at small town life in central Ontario in the 1930s. The book was written in about 1931. And it's based in a small town about 2 hours north of Toronto. Now, the picture here is of the actual book I used 55 years ago. Here's a CAD drawing of the train room. You enter from the lower right down here. And what this drawing shows is basically the outline walls and the benchwork outline. The grid is on 1 foot squares to give you an idea of the scale. And the dimensions are roughly 22 by 27 feet. This is an ON30 freelance layout. It's about a 75-foot main line. And the challenges are the ceiling height is only 7 feet. This is a 1958 bungalow that we bought 10 years ago. And it had a completely unfinished basement, which was unbelievable for me because most of the houses we looked at had a finished basement, which I was going to have to promptly rip out so I could build a railroad. But this basement had nothing in it. But the ceiling height was a little low. And the other problem, the real constraint was right here. This dotted line here, this is a big steel beam that goes across and holds this corner of the house up. So, and it's just over 6 feet under there, 6'2". So that was a problem. And then this right here is a demand boiler that we installed because we have a greenhouse on the back of the house that backs on this wall. So this is a demand boiler. It's fairly bulky. I can work around it. The only issue is it has a hinged door which opens up. So I do have to have a little bit of slimming down of the benchwork right here so that can be done. Here's the track plan. Oh, whoever's coughing, please mute yourself. Lower right, Mariposa, this is the main town, and it's named after the town in the book. And it's served with, it has an engine service facility, a passenger station, which doesn't exist yet. We'll get to that later. And it's served with a Y for turning. And there's a wharf scene right here in the lower corner. The main line proceeds, the red stays at 0 elevation, and it is staging. So there's 2 staging tracks concealed underneath here. The main line climbs at a 3% grade up to Stoney Creek, which is the second town on the layout. And then it's basically just a passing siding and 2 small sidings. And then there's what I call the Curva Grande, and this area is not developed yet. We'll talk about that later. And this is the town of Millwood up the top here, a small yard and a turntable for turning. As I mentioned, the ruling grade is about 3%. Here's what we've done so far. Everything that you've seen that's highlighted here is all the track is down, the backdrops are in. This section over here has most of the structures in place and some scenery. Not a lot of fine detailing and junk piles and stuff like that done yet. but we're focusing on the big picture first and then moving on. The Stoney Creek town has no structures in place at all yet. It's basically got the track work and that's it. So let's take a look at what we see when we walk into the train room. So this is what happens when you see on your right when you walk into, this is Mariposa Yard as it stands at the moment. As you can see, I'm using photographic backdrops from trackside sceneries. And here we have a freight station and various structures. We'll look at those in some detail later on. This gives you an overview. This site right here is where the big station is going to be, and we'll talk about that later. As we head out of the yard, we'll see the service facility. This is part of the Mount Albert scale model service facility. These two structures here, sand, water, coal, and over here is the engine house. Going out onto the wharf, you can see the engine house in the distance. There's a coach here waiting for the paddle wheeler to the stern wheeler to bring customers to take into town. And you can see the oil service facility here, or the oil tank farm here, and the boat building diorama over here. As we keep going, we go past the bunkhouse and heading out of town. The track to the right goes off to the staging track. This opening here will be concealed by trees at some point in the future. We're still trying to grow those. The main line proceeds right here, and this is the track that serves the oil tank farm. This is the end, what I call the alcove, which is the curve at that end of the room. And this is the 3% grade behind the brewery. And you can see the scene in the background. I particularly like this scene because this is very typical of the area that I am modeling. And here we are up in Stoney Creek. Here we are arrived in Stoney Creek. You'll see that the Canadian red ensign is flying right here. That was the flag, Canadian flag in 1930s. And our work train has proceeded up to the town here. And as you can see, there's no real structures here. There's just things put in place to give me some idea of siting and massing and what things are going to look like. The white rectangles represent Stoney Creek kits that I will be building for this town. And that's one of the reasons for the name, is the fact that most of the structures here will be Stoney Creek kits from Stoney Creek Designs, of course. And also, in a way, it's a tribute to my friend Roger Malinowski. And that's the end of the line for now. I particularly like this piece of backdrop here. Very typical of the kind of topography you see as you get up into the Georgian Bay area in north of Toronto. So how do we build all this? Well, let's take a look at some of the details. When we first moved into this house, or first got ownership of this house, we didn't actually move in for about 4 or 5 months. So we had a contractor on site doing all kinds of things upstairs, but while he was at it, I got him to do some things downstairs. So he did this curved corners. This is the same technique we used in our layout in Toronto. Works really, really well. It's basically a piece of masonite. And the way you do this is you take about 30 inches away from the corner, and that first piece of masonite, first piece of drywall rather, is 3/8 inch. The next piece of drywall is 1/2 inch, and that means you've got a 1/8 inch lip vertical. And you use that lip to hold a 4 foot wide piece of masonite in place, and it forms a perfect curve. It doesn't really need any bracing or anything else. You put it in with construction adhesive, and then you use Durabond for the joint. And we haven't found any problems. This has been in place for 9 years now, and there's no problems with settling or cracking or doing anything. It looks great. Carpet tile, we put down. I'm a big fan of carpet tile. If you do inevitably spill paint on something, you can just pull it up and replace it with another one. My contractor also put 2x2 posts lagged to the concrete block, rather the poured concrete walls. So I've got a nice solid foundation to put my brackets on. The contractor also installed a valance around the room. Of course, that meant that I had to have a pretty good idea of where the track plan was going to go, because once you build a valance, it's sort of there. but I really wanted to do this and do the lighting before I did the bench work, because it was one hell of a lot easier doing this standing on a short step ladder compared to trying to reach over the bench work to do it. So lighting basically consists of T8 dimmable fluorescent fixtures, about 160, there's 12 of those, about 160 feet of RGB LED strip, and a 22 6-watt LED in custom lamp holders that I made myself, just with lamp holder fits in a utility box. None of this can be seen because there's a acrylic panel in here, which I'll show you later, that covers that up so you don't see that. And you may ask the question, why does a lighting guy like you use T8 dimmable fluorescent instead of LED? Well, this was 9 years ago. And 9 years ago, there was no white light LED with adequate color that was dimmable and that gave me enough light. So I used the old standard 4-foot T8s, and I've got a case of lamps, so I should be okay. Bench work is conventional L girder, nothing very exciting here. The only thing I wanted to comment on here is these are L girders that are rescued from my my HO layout in Toronto, and then my ON3 layout in Toronto, and that wood is about 40 years old. So and as you can see, it's all pretty much all clear and just lovely wood to work with. It's kind of a shame having it buried in bench work, but there you go. For sub-roadbed, I used plywood, and my starting point was really the staging track, because it was essentially ground zero, and it seemed to me make sense to start there and work my way up. So I believe this is 5/8 or maybe 1/2 inch plywood used here. There's lots of support, so I think the largest span is about 15 inches, something like that. And of course, this stuff is pretty light, so it's not too much strain on it. You'll notice that there are pre-drilled holes in all of the stringers for wiring. It just makes life a lot easier. So the staging track here on the right-hand side is shown below Stoney Creek, plywood sub-roadbed, underlay cork to lay over the wood, over the plywood, and I just use HO Flex track under here, and a microengineering turnout. I just got one turnout there. We glued the underlay cork down with LePage's water-based contact adhesive, mostly because something that works really well, and it doesn't drive you out of the house with the smell. It's a little bit more tricky to use than the good stuff, the solvent base. What the key thing I found with it is timing, and it depends how humid it is. Because it's water-based, the drying time varies with how humid the room is. So crank up the dehumidifier and go crazy. So track planning, I needed to order my backdrops, and I needed to make sure the backdrops are going to work in terms of what the overall scene was going to look like. So I wanted to get some of the track planning down. I'd already done this on paper, but I really wanted to do it full size. I'd done it as a CAD drawing rather, and I wanted to do it full size on paper. So I just took a couple of sheets of plywood. This is the Mariposa yard. So we're looking at just under 12 feet here. I got a roll of 24-inch wide newsprint, which I just rolled out, really, really inexpensive, tape it down, and then do your track planning right on it, full size. I used Fast Track's turnout templates. You can see one right here. These are free download off the Fast Track site. And I use sweepsticks. Here's the Fast Track sweepstick. And these things are just fantastic. They're great for laying track, whether it's hand laid or flex track. But I think they're an even better tool for planning, because you can use these and lay it out, and it's going to be true. You don't have to worry about using a trammel or any of that stuff. It works very, very well. I placed some of the actual structures approximately where they might be, because I wanted to see what the sight lines were like. And as a result of all this, I ended up taking this whole yard and canting it about 3 degrees to the right. Instead of being dead straight, which is the way I originally drew it, I moved that off to the right. So this end is moved over to the right a little bit, just to give the yard a little bit more visual interest. And the nice thing about using the newsprint is that you can just take that whole track plan and just roll it up. And then when you come to actually track laying, you can roll it back out again and use it as a guide. So I had originally planned to paint my own backdrops, and then I realized that with my painting skill, it was probably going to take longer than I was going to be living. So and also I was at a show and I saw, I met Joey and I saw some of his backdrops. And I looked at them, the photographic backdrops. I thought, you know, those are really, really effective. So I had some discussion with him, and we ended up placing an order. And so what I did was I painted it's sort of an off-white gray color that the sky is at the top, which you'll see on the next slide. But I painted that, I matched that color and then painted around the perimeter so that if there was any gaps at all, it wouldn't show. We removed one of the L girders to make it easier to get in here, and we used painter's tape to assist with the alignment of the first panel. The panels that I got were 5, 6, and 8 feet long. So you don't want to get that first one crooked because you're going to have a hell of a time after that if you do. So as I mentioned, these are from Trackside Scenery. We installed them with 3M spray adhesive right onto the wall. It's going to make it interesting when we sell the house, but I guess you could either put a coat of paint over it or sell it the way it is. It takes at least 3 people to attach this to the wall because because they're being large, they're fairly hard to handle. You basically roll up most of it and work with about a 2-foot panel at a time, and then gradually unroll it as you go. This bulkhead had to be trimmed and fitted. I was trying to get rid of this bulkhead, but the mechanical engineer informed me that if I did that, there wouldn't be any heat in the master bedroom. So we had to go with it the way it is. And in this picture, you can see the acrylic panels that I used to reduce any glare from the overhead lighting. And that material is called cracked ice. You can get that from any of the home centers. So here's the backdrop in the alcove. You've already seen a sneak preview of this shot, but as I mentioned, I particularly like this shot. There is a link on this slide to Trackside Scenery, but I've also got a number of links at the end of the presentation, which may be of use to some of you. And here's the Mariposa yard. Once it was complete, the backdrops were down. I then was able to get my plywood installed and also the 5mm underlay cork. The reason I use underlay cork rather than regular model railroad cork is a lot more dense. It's much easier to work. It is better sound insulation, and it's also quite a bit less expensive because you buy it on a big roll. You buy like a 100-foot roll and then, you know, carve off what you need and sell the rest to your buddies. It's pretty popular stuff in our group. Now, one of the difficulties is that with backdrops, any backdrop, whether it's hand painted or photographic, is this bridge between the foreground, the 3-dimensional, and the background, the 2-dimensional. And I always have difficulty or have seen people having difficulty with this. I had about 40 years experience working in museum lighting, and museum dioramas have the same issue of making that blend really, really well done. I had the opportunity to work with some really fine artists who had a real touch for this. So I learned a lot of tricks from them. So the first thing I had to do was do this. And the reason I had to do this first is that I didn't want to have to be working on this after the track was down. So the trick was let's get this back part done. And then we can work on the foreground. It's easier to do then. So here's a shot right, this was taken obviously after the track was down and everything else, but I just wanted to show this embankment here. This is only about 3.5 inches, 3 inches to 3.5 inches wide. And the method I used throughout is the same, and we're going to go through a couple of slides showing this process, but it's basically extruded foam insulation that's been carved to fit, roughened up with a hacksaw blade, and then covered in Sculptamold. Just some acrylic paint, dirt and stone, real dirt and stone, ground foam, Scenic Express Martin Wellberg bushes, which are right in here. You can see them up here and up here, and they just do a wonderful job, and static grass. So that's the method. Now let's look in a little bit more detail at that. So here's the scene behind Stoney Creek. And the reason I'm showing you this a little bit out of sequence, but I'm showing you this because it's a better view and it's a wider section. So, and I also took more pictures when I was doing this because this is where I started. So here's a coroplast roof over top of the staging yard. So this is that corrugated plastic basically. quite rigid and fairly strong. I have supported about every 6 inches or so, and it's also supported all the way along the back. So then we took some extruded foam and we carved that up, and we used some spray foam insulation, great stuff, and sprayed that on in lumps, just, randomly, trying to create some rock forms. Sculpt-A-Mold on top of that. I'm a big fan of Sculpt-A-Mold. I have about a 50-pound bag of it, and it's just, I love it for doing rock formations and scenery. Acrylic paint on top of that. You can see here I put some dirt and stone on top of this, and it's it's still wet. And then bushes and static grass, and we ended up with something looking like this. So, and once again, you really need to have been there to this part of the world to see this. But this is exactly what happens. It's very, very thin soil. This is not farm country at all. It's forested, heavily forested, and very thin soil where the rock formations are. As soon as you get near the water, near the lakes, a lot of rock, and a lot of this sort of scrubby brush around the rock formations. And so that's what I was looking for. So I kept going back to pictures of our old family cottage and trying to match what we were getting there. Here's another shot. This is where that backdrop formation is, and the line between the two is right in here somewhere. Yeah, right in here is the line between the background and the foreground. I used quite a bit of Tellus. This is just real rock just smashed up. It's interesting the response you get from neighbors when you sit out on your back porch with a 5-pound mallet pounding rock for an afternoon. They're sort of wondering if you've lost your marbles or what's going on. It's little bits of real twigs from the backyard and brush to make it look more realistic. Here's that section around the lake at the end of the alcove. Once again, very low rock. This rock is it's a mix. You get some limestone, but you also get some granite. So you sometimes see some pink. Let me go back a slide if I can. Yeah, you'll see a little bit of pink in here, up in here and here. This is very common of the area that I'm modeling. Okay, so back to track planning. So here's the layout at Stoney Creek once again, you can see our paper pattern out. And I spend a lot of time with these because I figure that once I start gluing the track down, I really don't want to rip it up again. So I want to make sure I got this right. So I'll put this down and I'll go away for a day or two and then come back and look at it and think about it and place some cars and just think about structure. Oh, there we go. That was nasty. Structures and where they're going to be located, and these may not be the actual structures, but I'm just trying to get an idea of what the visual is going to look like. What's the impression going to be? And there it is with the cork down. Okay, the next thing to do is we've got the plywood down for the yards and the cork down for the yards, but what about in between? So in between on the main line and where we've got curves and grades, the sub-roadbed for the main line is something a little unusual. I really don't like using plywood because it's so wasteful. I don't know if you bought plywood lately, but as Dave was referring to before about, you think you're buying a small foreign car with what they want for a sheet of plywood nowadays. So my friend Jeff Millman, who you've met last couple of months, he's been on doing clinics on working with brass and with painting. And he came up with this method, and he picked it up from someone else, but he made some refinements to it. And basically, it consists of solid pine trapezoids. So this is a trapezoidal shape. And as you can see, they've been glued together. The way Jeff does it is he does 2 layers, and he overlaps them by 50% each layer. But our friend our friend Brad Makarick, who's also a member of our group up here, he came up with the idea of joining these together with using a biscuit joiner. And so I tried that as an experiment, and I just thrilled with it because it works really, really well. So the angle that you cut these at, which you cut with a chop saw, that angle is determined by the radius. And there's a very clever formula that Jeff worked out for figuring out what this angle will be based on the radius but I chickened out, and what I did was just made a drawing of it in my CAD system, and then let the CAD tell me what the angle was. And I think, if I remember correctly, for 30-inch radius, which is I'm using on my main line, it's about 8.6 degrees, something like that. So the sections were joined using a biscuit joiner, and you end up with this, and I built these, I needed 2 of these, so I built 2 quarter circles. And you can pick this one end up and hold it straight out. It's light, it's strong, it's rigid, and it's cheap. So it's got a whole bunch of good things going for it. The pine boards that I started off with, my local home center had the special on them. They were true 3/4 inch. In other words, 1 inch finished, thick. And I believe they were 11-inch wide and 8 feet long. And they had them on special for, I can't remember, $11 or something like that. It was a bargain. So I bought a bunch of them and carved them up to use for this. I also built some shelves with them while I was at it, especially for that price. So here you can see them in use on the curve at the end of the alcove, and you can see I've been using my sweepsticks here to make sure my grade is correct, or make sure my curve is correct. And I used a grade gauge that tells me the angle to make sure I've got the right angle on here. And this is the siding that goes to the brewery. So right here, it's all been propped up with little bits of wood and stuff to make sure I got everything right before I fasten it down. And here's a close-up of the joint between the 2 sections, looking straight down. And you can see I put pencil lines on the center line so that when I'm laying my track or laying my cork down, I make sure I get right and bang in the middle. Track work. So I used Fast Track's fixtures, of course, number 6 on the mains, number 5 on the sidings. I'm using microengineering code 70 and code 83 weathered flex track. Almost all the sidings are code 70. And I did the whole Y section in code 70 just because I thought it would be fun to do that. And I used the sweep sticks and also these metal curve sections here and here. I use these as a guide to make sure I've got nice smooth curves. And I see Craig Symington is on tonight. Last month he mentioned his wiring rules, and I completely agree. Every piece of wire, every piece of rail has a wire connected to it. The frogs are pre-wired from underneath before installation. In other words, I put the frog wire on before I install the turnout, and then I drop the turnout in place. And I don't have to worry about having the wire show. And you can see, I just use joiners for alignment, of course, and you can see there's a tie going to go into the space here to fill the gaps where the rail joiners are. Just use liquid nails to hold the track down, glue the track down. As you can see, I use some weights here for holding stuff down while the glue sets up. I find this stuff works really, really well. And if you absolutely have to remove it afterwards, you can. You can actually slide a thin paint scraper underneath underneath the ties. You have to do it carefully, but you can do that. Next thing I like to do is some details on the track. I really like to put San Juan, thanks to Doug Junda, San Juan details, components. These are designed for code 100, but a little bit of work with a file, and you can work them in, and you can even use them with code 70. This is code 83, but they seem to work very well. And I also like using the joint bars. I cheat a little bit. I'm trying to selective compression, it's called, right? So I'm doing them about every 7 inches or so. So what, 28 feet? And I cut a little groove in the rail with an X-Acto, with a razor saw, just a tiny groove. I'm not cutting into the head or anything, just make a notch basically. And then I color that using a black marker so it shows. And then I put my joint bars on. These obviously are unpainted, so they're later on they get painted, as you can see. It's one of those details that I know it's there, and it's one of those things that shows up in photographs, so it's worth doing. The other piece of track detail I really like on the curve in the alcove behind the brewery, I did a guardrail. So the guardrail, this is code 83 rail, and I use a code 70 guardrail. And once again, you can see the joint bars. I staggered them, which is North American practice. Interesting, I did some research on that, and apparently the Brits always have them aligned. but in North America, typically they're staggered. All my turnouts are controlled by Blue Point or Fast Track's Bullfrog machines, but I wanted the pull, the controller to be a little more elegant than the usual little wooden knob or whatever. And so I came up with these. These are laser cut acrylic. So this is a laser piece of oval of laser cut acrylic, and then the silver part is a second layer of acrylic but thinner, and it's got a brushed aluminum finish on it. So it's got this kind of look. And what I looked for inspiration on this was dashboards from luxury cars from the 30s, like Duesenbergs and Packards. And they had these brushed metals. They had exposed hardware. You'd quite often see exposed hardware on the dashboards where they were completely, they weren't trying to hide it. It's held together with good hardware, and here it is. And these knobs actually came from IKEA. I was really pleased with these. They've got a nice heavy feel to them. They're stainless, and they've got a very nice heavy feel to them. And at least, I'm sorry, I think they're aluminum, not stainless, but they've got that brushed look to them. And I'm really pleased with the way they look. I'm getting to be too old to crawl around on my hands and knees underneath a railroad to fix wiring stuff. So I decided I'd really like to have my my DCC system where I can actually get at it. So many of you guys may be old enough to remember the Motorola Works in a Drawer back in the 1960s. They had a TV, they advertised Works in a Drawer, which basically they took one of the circuit boards and stuck it on a slider like it was some special feature. Anyway, but I thought, hey, there's the kernel of a good idea. So I went to my home center and bought a couple of real nice ball bearing drawer slides, made a drawer up out of some MDF, and put my whole system in here. So I've got 2 5-amp boosters. This is NCE, 2 power supplies, 4 circuit breakers, because I've divided up into 4 sub-districts. And then I've got 2 auto reversers, one for the Y and one for the turntable. The one for the Y is right here. The one for the turntable is not installed yet because, of course, the turntable isn't installed either. I guess that'll be one of my jobs to do. And behind, you can see the storage track. Just in passing, I don't have a photo of this, but the staging track has got camera at each end, and they're baby monitors. And they work fine. They're not as good as some people are using backup cameras, and they're nicer. They're a lot more money, but they do give you a much better picture. But the baby monitor cameras they're okay. They'll tell you where the cars are. That's all you really need to know. And so this whole thing slides out, so you can work on it. This is underneath the Stoney Creek location, so this will be covered up. And I took 2 ramp meters on the front, so I can see what each booster is doing. Without having to poke around to look for meters. I did the same thing on the Y controller. If you guys haven't discovered the Barrett Hill touch toggles, this thing is miraculous. This is modern technology at work, and I just love the way it works. Very easy to put together. It's plug and play, just like the man says. Kevin Hunter, great to deal with. Really good guy. I met him at one of the shows. I think it might have been Springfield, and I was quite interested with his approach. And so I've got the Y located going into the Mariposa yard, and you need to be able to control it from 2 locations. So this is fairly complicated. You've got 3 turnouts, 4 in my case, because I've got a siding that comes off one leg of the Y. And you want to be able to control it from 2 locations, and you only need a single controller for each turnout, because for each leg rather, because if you want to go this way, you just touch this and it lines this route. If I touch this one, it lines this route. And if I touch this one, it lines this route. And if I want to go up here, I touch this one. And all you have to do is just touch that with your finger, and it does the change. And the wiring is all, like I say, plug and play. You just plug it in, and it worked first time out of the box. So I'm very impressed with that. And once again, I've got it in a drawer. So this panel right here is basically on a drawer, and the whole thing slides out, and this is what's behind it. So let's take a little bit of time on structures, because that's my real love in the hobby. Structures and locomotives, I guess, are the things I like the best. And the structures in particular, I really enjoy. So this is a scratch-built wharf that came off my last layout. It's 32 inches long. It was originally, my last layout in Toronto was 0 and 3. So when I came here and I decided to move to 0 and 30, this had to be rebuilt, and it also had to be repurposed. So originally it was shaped unusually. It had an angle cut here. That was because there was a rock face on this side, and I had to stretch it out. So I did it just like the prototype would did it, by adding new stringers and bracing it from underneath and doing all that stuff like you'd normally do. And it's hand lay code 70, and there's a number 6Y turnout located right here. So we redid all the decking. Now here's a view from underneath. This is kind of a neat product, MTB low profile turnout motor. If you're not familiar with this, I needed something really low profile. I couldn't do a hand turnout or a hand control on the deck because it wasn't room for starters, and I didn't like the look of that. So I wanted to do something that was concealed. So this is less than a ½ an inch thick. So it tucks in here fairly neatly. I built a little bit of a retainer, just a piece of wood. So if somebody does look underneath the wharf, they can't see the edge of the motor here. But works great, and it's got built-in frog wiring. That's from MTB. The rest of the wharf was finished off with all new planking. These are all separate planks. The nail holes were done with this little trick here. I got one of those cheap Chinese screwdrivers you get with some tool that you buy, and it comes with a cheap screwdriver that if you use it once, it's not any good anymore because it's made out of pot metal. So I just ground the hacksaw the tip off and filed it so it was flat. And then on the other end, I drilled 3 holes on my drill press and just put straight pins in. So I've got 3 pins. This is spaced for a 10-inch wide board. And then I just used a regular ink pad and went along, went boop, 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 boop. I find you can do that for about 15 minutes and then you go stark raving mad. So it's probably a good idea to stop at that point and come back and do some more the next night. You can see one of my joint bars here. This hasn't been painted yet. And these, I made these, I scratch built the bollards, and the bollards, the whole deck is held down with 4 number 4 wood screws, and 4 of the bollards are held in place with super magnets. So you just pull them up and the wood screws are underneath. So that's a way of hiding that stuff. More structures. Here's the freight station. This is a Chooch freight house. It's a rosin kit structure. It's now with its 3rd owner, all people in our group. And I believe this building is at least 40 years old. I mean, that's from the first time it was built. So it's been around for a bit. I've done some changes to it. I added some lighting to it. I need to add more junk on the inside. There's a couple of figures I added. This figure is new, and this figure had this structure is quite long, and this structure had warped over time. So what I did was I drilled a couple of holes and put a couple of small wood screws in, and this crate right here is hiding a wood screw. So if you move that crate out of the way, underneath there's a wood screw that holds this puppy down so it doesn't warp anymore. This is that station at night. As you can see, I need a little bit more stuff in here because it looks a little naked at the moment. Here's the car shop. This is the Mount Albert scale models car shop kit. It has the box car that's being built. I've got a couple of real nice Aspen. These are all Aspen figures. These 2 I think they were regular production figures, and we used for this kit. This was a figure or a grouping, if you will, a dog and a man. That they did specifically for us based on photographs of a friend in our group who had passed, Mr. Stan Windrum. And this is a model of Stan and one of his dogs. And here's that same building at night. As you can see, I added lighting, and you can see the workbenches are covered in clutter and tools and various other bits and pieces. Next part of that scene is the critter service, which is right next to the car shops over here to our right. This is a Chooch hand car shed. This is once again is a rosin kit. And this building was in the 1980s was on the first module that the Maple Leaf Group built to take to the Kimberton shows and to the narrow gauge conventions. This was a structure that was on that module. So it's still seeing useful life after what, 35 years. And this is part of the Mount Albert Scale Models engine service facility. I've just added a bit more junk to it. The street lamp was kind of fun to build. This is from a company called Engineering. That's a letter N followed by engineering. It's kind of hard to find them on the web because you put the normal word engineering and it won't come up. But they do make a kit for making lamps. I wouldn't say they're the easiest thing in the world to make, but you can work your way through it. Very, very small diameter tubing, aluminum tubing. And so I made this, I've also put a switch on the bottom here because these would have been switched manually. In the 30s, they wouldn't have had this automated in a small town. And here's that same scene at night with the street light on. I like the way this gives a little pool of light on the street here. It works pretty well, I think. So can anyone tell me, either in the chat box or just hold the space bar down, if you know, what is the significance of 1913 to the model railroad hobby? Dum, dum, da, dum, 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 da, dum, 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 dum. 1913 was the year that John Allen was born. And and this was the Gorey engine house, which appeared in many photographs of John's layout. One of the interesting things about this building is I don't think I ever saw it with doors on it. So I don't know whether John, living in California, figured it wouldn't need doors on an engine house, or he just never got around to it. So we took a few liberties. We also changed the design of the doors a little bit to make them more typical rectangular type doors rather than the round top, because I always thought the round top had sort of a European look to it. I know there are exceptions to that. I also took the liberty of doing the venting up here after seeing what Al Collins did with his with one of his kits, where he did one of our kits where he did the same thing. So I decided to follow that idea, kind of like that. I did keep the skylights though. And I know skylights in an engine house would be ridiculous because, of course, the first steam engine that went in there, you wouldn't be seeing anything through those windows anymore. But it's so iconic of John's structure that I thought it would be okay. I would get away with it. This building has 50 separate pieces of microscope glass glazing. That was fun. And here's a shot at night showing some of the inside. Water hose on the floor here, little pools of water here and there. I did with epoxy, garbage cans, and various other bits of detritus that you'd find inside a working engine house. I put the light fixtures. Mike May is probably the only person online who would appreciate this, but I put the light fixtures where you would actually put them, because if you put them in the center over the tracks, of course, as soon as you park the locomotive in there, you wouldn't be able to see a damn thing. So the lights would be located in the middle. And here's a couple of daytime shots showing some of the details, all the tools that are on the workbenches here, various tools, garbage cans, all kinds of stuff, the toolbox over here. Here's a globe valve for that water hose. And on this side, looking through the other end, you'll see the air compressor. There's a oxy welding outfit here, and a kind of nice little, I got these little carts from Craig Webb. Very nice little metal carts with wheels on them for taking coal from the coal facility and bringing it into the engine house. Here's the machine shop, which is immediately behind the engine house, as you can see here. This is a Stoney Creek Designs kit. This was built by the late Brian Nolan, who's a member of the Dave Revelio's group with the Suncoast Museum down in Florida. And all I did to this was basically added some lighting. Whatever you do, don't build buildings on Homosote. This is another building that warped because it was on a Homosote base. And once again, there's a wood screw hiding underneath this barrel, which is holding it down, preventing it from warping anymore. Now this is an Evan Designs gooseneck lamp, and these are quite reasonably priced and very nicely done. So if you're looking for O-scale gooseneck lamps, look up Evan Designs. That's EVAN. Very nice product. And this was a built building on a base, so I had a bit of a job getting this wired, but I managed to do it. And there it is with the light on. This is a white ground PJ Paget boat repair. It's actually a diorama. It's hardly fair to call it a kit because it comes with scenery and everything else. It's a very large kit, very rare. I don't think I've ever seen another one built. I'd be interested in hearing from people if they've seen other ones of this this model built. This was built by my friend Locke McGoodle for me. Locke was short of some shekels and out of work for a while, so I helped him out a bit, and he built this model for me. It's been heavily modified because when we moved to this location, I realized it was completely backwards because the way the kit was designed is this building, the main building, is on this side, and this structure with a ramp and everything else is on the other side, and this is over here, and it just wasn't going to work for me. Fortunately, Locke built it so that everything comes off it. So all the buildings, the boat, and everything comes off. So then I sort of looked at it for a long time and thought about it, and then I went at it with a handsaw and hacked it up into 3 pieces and put it back together in this order. So now it fits into the corner of my layout. And I wanted it to be front and center because it's so well detailed and quite a nice little model. I have lighting right now in here, but I don't have lighting in here yet. I still have to do that. I think I bought this kit in 1985. And here's the view of the main building from an angle. The only thing I had to change on here is this had a mail pouch tobacco sign on here, and I don't think they ever sold mail pouch in Canada. So I put a Canada Dry sign because I thought that would be more appropriate. This is a Thomas York kit. It was built by my friend Jim Thomas. Jim's an interesting guy. He's in model railroading, but mostly he's in structure building. So he has about somewhere north of 300 structures, O-scale structures in his home. And it's quite a joy to go over and see them. And they're all built to this kind of level. So just great stuff. Nice motorcycle here. Okay, this is the oil tank farm, or immediately behind the lubricants van structure, the one we just looked at. This is a Stoney Creek kit. This particular one was built by Roger Malinowski at Stoney Creek. And this gave me excuse to have oil-fired locomotives and tank cars, so it's perfect. And the bunkhouse is on the way out of town. This is the housing for the single guys who work on the railroad. And I built this during a month in Florida. So it was, it's got kind of a nice little thing to take on when you're on a trip like that, because you don't need a lot of tools to build something like this. I had some pan pastels and some stains and an X-Acto knife and some glue, and it's pretty much all I needed. This doesn't have lighting in it yet, but it's pretty much all my structures are lift off, so they can be modified. And here's the brewery. So this is the Mount Albert scale models kit based on the Campbell Brett's Brewery. Some people started off in the hobby building Campbell kits, as did I. And this one was a tribute. We actually got the rights from Campbell to do this in O-scale. This is the pilot model, so it was built by Roger. I made some modifications and I added some interior detail and some lighting here. It is at night, so you can see the lighting in the office here, and you can also see a little bit of light. I didn't want a lot of light in here, just a little bit of light glowing out of the top windows here was all I did there. And here's that office. I just wanted to look at this for a moment. This was a built model with a floor on a base. So the first challenge was to figure out how I was going to do this. And I came to the realization that the only way I could put anything in here was through the window. So this window had to be removed without damaging it. And that in itself was kind of fun. But I finally got it out and without damaging it. And then I did the interior, and the interior is almost all photographic. So this is a photograph taken from the web of some wallpaper. And this is a photograph of a door, and this is a photograph of some wainscoting, and all those pieces were, and this is a photograph of a station clock, and all those pieces were cut out and then glued onto cardstock, and then glued onto a piece of heavier cardstock. The door was glued on from the back, so it looks like the door's got a shadow, because it does. It's recessed, right? So it looks right. And then over here on this wall, there's a photograph of a old style wooden filing cabinet, a big wide one, and then a bunch of shelves with bottles on them, which I thought would be appropriate for a brewery. It's kind of fun project. 3D figure, Grant Line stove back here, and a laser printed or laser cut desk, and a laser cut chair, and just some papers on the desk. I'm quite pleased with the way that turned out. This is right on the edge of the layout, so you can look right in and see this. The Mariposa Station, this is a non-existent kit in O scale. We hope that it's coming soon. This is an ITLA kit of the Grimsby Station. And two of the local bigwigs here are to announce the coming of the new station. And Josh Smith, who's the member of parliament for this riding, is on the right, because Josh never misses a chance to stand up in front of the public and take credit for something. Okay, motive power. So doing something a little unusual with motive power. I'm gradually replacing out-of-the-box Bachmann with brass models that are regauged from ON3. Now you may say, why are you doing that? Why didn't you just model in ON3? And I just wanted to do something different. And I also really like the narrower, the 30-inch gauge, because it's more narrow, right? I can see the appeal of 2-foot for that reason. I can really see that, the equipment going along, and it's got these, really narrow rails underneath it. Makes it look more fragile. Anyway, this is number 5. This is an Overland brass 26-ton Shea, which was Mitchell number 5, and it's been backdated to coal. And Overland was nice enough to make this kit available, an additional kit for this model, available with the proper bunker for the coal-fired version of this locomotive. Because this locomotive, before it came to Mitchell, was coal-fired. When Mitchell got their hands on it, of course, they turned it to oil-fired. It was regauged to 30-inch, and the challenge with a Shea, of course, is you have to keep the line shafts lined up with the gears on the ends of the axles. So it's a bit of a trick to do that. And there's probably a clinic in there somewhere, but that's for a future. And this has got a Tsunami 2 in it, and all the usual lighting and stuff. Well, the other fun thing I did with this is I laser cut window frames out of 11 thou laser board. And so they look more three-dimensional, and they're much easier to paint them when they're off the model in a separate piece. This is number 9. This is an Oriental brass 26-ton Shea. Now this is the other, this is interesting because it's a different manufacturer. This is Oriental Models, but it's the same prototype. So it's a 26-ton Mitchell number 5, but this is the oil-fired version, of course. So this is as it was run on the Mitchell. It's been remotored with a Grant drive. It's a really nice runner. Both the other Shea has also got a Grant drive. And this has been regauged to 30-inch and also has a Tsunami 2. The caboose, by the way, is a San Juan. Another shout out to our friend Doug Junda. This is the DNRGW short caboose with the ON30 trucks. It's got a full interior in it. This is number 21. This is a Bachmann Climax, of course, which I think is one of the best things they did. It's got a Banta wood cab on it, which I added. And it also has a Tsunami 2, which I preferred to the sounds compared to the off-the-shelf sound card that they used. This one's been weathered up a bit, lettered for Mariposa. I kind of like unusual stuff, as you can tell. So this is obviously unpainted, but this is a Buddha rail truck. And Buddha is a company that some of you may be familiar with. Buddha made a lot of the things like re-railing frogs and turnout cast parts for railroads, turnout parts for various railroads. And they also made these small rail trucks. This is an Eddie Byro custom. Eddie Byro is a custom builder in Western Canada, in Calgary, and does really beautiful work. He works mostly in half-inch scale, but he did a run of these about 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know exactly. I have to check with Eddie how many he did in O scale, but I think this may be the only one that's in ON30. It also has a Tsunami 2 and a Keep Alive and the speaker, and all of that is between the frame rails. So it was a bit of a job getting everything in there, but I managed it. And this is going to be a weed sprayer on the layout. It needs some interior detail. As you can tell by the big windows, it really cries for something. There was just a bench on this side, which was formed by this weird thing. We figured this weird thing here so they could carry a long thing on the side here. This forms the bench that the guy sits on that's running it. And all that's inside of this is really rudimentary dashboard with a couple of switches on it and a couple of sticks sticking out of the transmission. The transmission's under the floor here. So there's a couple of gear levers sticking out. So I don't think it'll be too difficult to scratch build that. So in progress, I have a Flying Zoo Climax, which has to be turned to 30-inch. I have a Car Shop 3-truck Climax, which is basically a basket case. So it's going to be a job to do that. That's going to be a project. I have a Backwoods Miniatures Mac AC bus like this one on the right here, and it's built. The superstructure is all built. I still have to do the running gear on that. And I have a Precision 18-ton Shea kit, which if I live long enough, will see service as the yard switcher in Mariposa. Some small details. Here's an Interaction Hobbies laser cut Model T kit, which I built, and of course I had to have it with all the lights working. When I look at it in the photographs, I realized I should put a bigger resistor on these 2 LEDs because this is a little bit too bright. The headlights are right, perfect. They're making a nice little pool of light in front of the car. The brake light works, of course, or the backup light or tail light rather. And they do this model. I think there's 5 variations. I think they're $23 or $24. They're quite a reasonable price. I wouldn't say it's the easiest thing I've ever built because the parts are pretty much scale cross section, so it's pretty fragile, but it does make up into a really nice little model. Here's some figures. Most of these are limited run figures that were done by Flying Zoo, Shozo Inui, probably 35 or 40 years ago. He did a limited run. They came in 3 sets, I believe, and I think there were 5 in a set. And I managed to pick up all 3 of them. And these particular ones, these 3, these 2 here and these 2, this one, these were painted for me by Dave Revelia. If you get to Tampa, you have got to go to the Suncoast Museum. If you haven't seen it, they have a fine railroad collection, but they have an amazing military model collection as well. And of course, those guys, figure painting is their thing. So they're the people you want to go to. And this all came out of a clinic that Dave was doing at a fine scale expo convention, I think it was, and took the time to show me how to paint. But these ones he did for me. This was not done by Dave. Excuse me. This came from the Midwood collection when the Midwoods passed, and I was able to pick up this from their collection. I just thought that was just such a nice little scene. So what's next? So the next thing to do is not the Curva Grande, which you might think, well, that would be the logical thing to do, but it's actually the practical thing to do is to do this first. And this is pretty tricky because the backdrop in here is going to be fairly convoluted. So I think I'm going to actually take the sections of backdrop and cut them and put them on panels, on masonite panels, and glue the panels to the walls, because getting around all this stuff is going to be a bit of a monster with a 5-foot piece of wallpaper. Once you get past around the corner here, it's pretty easy sailing up to here. Once that's done, the plywood can go down, the cork, and then we can start laying track. The reason for that is once I build, right now this is empty, right? So once I build this, the access in here is going to be more difficult. So I'm going to build this first and then do the Curva Grande last. And finally, I'm not entirely sure how I want to tackle this section in here. I've got a really nice small sawmill, and I think that would be a really great scene in here with some a little bit of a canyon-y type thing happening. But then also I'd like to extend this siding here and perhaps have a small gravel operation because I've got some nice little gondola cars. Okay, and I think that's about it. Here's some links. I won't leave this up because once it's on video, you can just freeze it and read the ones you want. And I could also send this file, this page to Russ separately, and he could post it if you decide to do that. And finally, I'd just like to thank Jeff Millman for the photography and crew help, and also Jeff and Brad Mackerick for the work sessions they did over the last month or so to help me get ready for this. Backdrop crew was Al, Jeff, Gary, and Daryl all helped get the backdrops up. A bit of a job, and it was fun once we figured it out. And thanks to my wife for the Photoshop magic.
Well, thank you, Gerry. That was great.